So secondly, the biggest problem with regressivism involves anger. Specifically, the new angry. This is taken from the new atheists. The same is true with new feminists, new rights activists of any kind, quite often the newly awakened to an idea of injustice or a cause, and they are very, very angry. This is where the Tumblr feminists tend to be, and who men's rights activists tend to use to attack, and are often themselves the new angry. The newly engaged, newly angry often have a short-term limited knowledge bank of the topic, and jump into discussions with people who have been around the activism and politics block for years or decades and have more perspective and nuance. They've stated their cases long ago, were standing up for rights long ago, their position hasn't changed, and they don't feel the need to repeat every part of their stance every time they talk. They dig deeper into the nuanced context and calm contemplation. They realize the fight for justice is long and slow, and they need to do a constant level of well-thought-out, well-researched tactics, discarding tactics that have failed in the past, even if they seem like they should intuitively work. They understand communication, dialogue, and compromise can actually cause change, even though it never feels as satisfying as vilifying, mocking, and isolating the people you disagree with. The new angry jumps into the conversation and is appalled by what appears to be complacency, apathy, and neglect. They also tend to be most heavy on the internet, which makes them the loudest on the internet, using tactics like harassment that turn off would-be allies, or people who might be able to compromise with them, or be on the fence. Internet bubbles make the situation even worse as the vilification and talking points rabbit holes get deeper and weirder and less compromising and meaner. Check out my video on the dark side of every movement for more on this. The new angry often has the inability to grasp the scale of a particular argument just due to inexperience. In measurement, we look at and measure things based on the level of scale you're working on. You don't measure an elephant using micrometers. If you do, the measurement will take forever, and the significant figure accuracy will be incredibly poor. The same is true with arguments of intensity, disagreement, threat, and nuance. On the internet, you could be arguing nuances on one scope, and someone from the new angry is arguing a completely different scope, and neither of you are having an actual discussion. They think you are rationalizing and being an apologist for something you don't actually believe, but their scope is way too broad or too narrow for the complex topic, and does way more damage to communication and has a lot more unintended consequences than they are aware. In a particular context, I will be the most outspoken against Islam you can get. In another context, I will be firmly defending Muslims because of what is said about them often by a member of the new angry, who often are oblivious to the concepts in history I mentioned on diplomacy and soft power. I will also be defending them against stereotypes made by the right-wing media. It appears to be flip-flopping, pseudo-intellectual, or someone trying to pretend to be above the fray to seem more intellectual. When I went through my angry atheist phase, I lumped all Christians into the same category. I would have people try and correct me on that not all Christians were like that, and I hated them, that they were excusing Christians. In my mind, these people are either not real Christians, or a tiny minority lukewarm in their faith. No true Scotsman sounded like apologetics. Just by being a Christian made them complicit in their crimes. However, in terms of communication, taking this approach is actually not even close to the best way to get about presenting your arguments and changing minds. When someone is making a claim about you and they lump you into a group you detest or very strongly disagree with on many issues, you will immediately write that person off as an idiot and less likely to listen or open up, allowing the other person to understand how to better make their case. When people lump atheists in with Stalin, Mao, and Pol Pot, our instant reaction is that person is an idiot, sayonara, dumbass, or to lock up, get frustrated, and have to argue semantics of definitions and no true Scotsman fallacies. This is even more true about people feeling socially stigmatized. The us versus them ratchets up dramatically in a survival mode, shutting down all real communication. Even more, it makes you, the non-stigmatized, feel like you have won without actually learning anything about how to adjust or reframe your argument for the next time. Communication and changing minds is essential to causing any real change, and being able to listen is the only way to better change misunderstanding. It's why I made that video asking for examples of regressive leftism in the first place. It was to learn what all of us, myself included, were not understanding. Calling Islam the worst religion and claiming the majority have violent ideas does absolutely nothing to change minds of actual Muslims, just like claiming that all Christians are complicit in the hate Westboro Baptist Church has, which there may be a case to be made. It does nothing to open up discussion and building understanding of each other, and in the process correcting our own potentially bad ideas. That language, especially when used against a socially stigmatized group, is so often throughout history the language that precedes mob justice and mass oppression, such as Jews in Europe and Catholics in America with the second rise of the KKK. Stigmatized groups are even more sensitive to this kind of language, even more likely to shut down and not feel safe thinking about ideas new to them. The longer you've been paying attention to politics, the harder it is to explain multi-cause problems to people who recently became politically aware. It's why you aren't overreacting or being an apologist and aren't just using the latest tragedy to push your own agenda. Take for example the Orlando shooting. Yes, the man was Muslim. Yes, the attack was homophobic. However, changing minds takes generations. We hated Catholics 100 years ago, who also did some acts of terrorism in Europe. The majority, however, did not. Almost 1,000 mass shootings, according to federal figures, defined as more than 2 people, have happened in the US since Sandy Hook. Of those mass shootings, only 2 were Muslim. All were men. More toddlers this year have killed people with guns than Muslims in the US. Making someone not radically Islam or not gay-hating can take generations. However, restructuring their access to guns and tackling the uber-macho and anti-gay mindsets in our culture is something we can do to reduce the destruction they can do. Sadly, people who are angry and haven't been paying attention claim that you are just pushing your agenda, and it's really hard to explain without assuming they should know what you know about the long-term patterns that have been happening. I'm angry that it was an attack on gays, and that it may have been ISIS-inspired, but I have no control over either of these, nor does our government. I'm even more angry that there are clear solutions that take away no law-abiding, mentally competent citizens' guns away that one party and the NRA blocks for reasons. When a tragedy happens that you have been harping on over and over again that you saw being preventable, suddenly you're exploiting the tragedy for your own political agenda. I know mass shootings are going to happen. We can spend all that time blaming Muslims, black people, mentally ill, or bad parents, ignoring of course the white supremacists and their death tolls, or we can actually do something to fix the overarching problem. It's a problem that affects many groups, and just blaming it on the group of the most recent shooter and not scaling up prevents us from seeing the much larger problems. One of the reasons why the Muslim population isn't as much a threat in Europe as it could be is because Europe has taken steps America won't when it comes to gun violence, access to education, and income inequality, and therefore have a lower level of homicide crimes than America. First-generation crimes are a fraction of the native population level, while the second generation matches that of natives. If guns were available to everyone in Europe and they had the inequality we have, Europe would be a bloodbath right now. Like most shooters, dying is what radicalized Muslims want anyway, and seeing someone with a concealed or open displayed gun would do nothing to change their mind or reduce fatalities. ISIS has to use a complex network to get guns to its supporters for those attacks, while the head of ISIS literally lists America as an easy target because it's so easy to get access to guns. They just need to find a willing attacker, which is surprisingly low compared to the other groups of mass shooters in the US. If we can't do the basics of having a broad discussion on the same scale and scope, instead of villainizing someone for not prefacing or repeating something they said many times before, or don't agree with you on the intensity you should place the blame and fear on something neither of you can affect or fix, nothing you actually do will ever get done. It will just be a new angry name-calling shoutfest that never gets us anywhere and ensures the problem just gets worse. Lastly, regressive left is often the anti-SJW version of the word privilege, a very powerful, specific word that is useful, but in some SJW circles is used as an attempt to shut you out of any conversation and discredit you. Regressive is also the new gay. Anything that you would have been called gay for 10 years ago seems to be what they call regressive now. They have a broad but shallow and very certain righteous anger about what is going on, and when you discuss a deeper, more nuanced topic, you end up being an apologist for heinous crimes. Nuance, depth, and context are regressive, aka fucking gay. It's also used to mean disingenuous or lying. It has nothing to do with anything in America, nothing to do with feminism unless a feminist has actual jurisdiction over an area and defends or ignores abuses of women by Muslims for the blind sake of multiculturalism, or more likely because they want to keep their seat, or don't want to anger the powder keg caused by poor housing and integration. It does not mean a feminist pointing out problems in America and not at the moment prefacing it or discussing feminism as it pertains to the Middle East. That's beyond the scope of the conversation. It is a conservative buzzword dog whistle used to make fellow conservatives immediately assume evil or hypocrite, just like feminazi. It's why upon the right grabbing it as an attack buzzword, Majid Nawaz stopped using it immediately because it had lost all meaning. You keep using that word. It has a specific meaning. I just don't think it means what you think it means.